Can I have a tissue from someone's tissue bag? Because apparently people are trying to get me started before I even have a chance to get up here. I got it, thank you. Okay, perfect. All right, just give me 1 second here. Just want to have it ready. All right, good morning. I think I'm gonna have to take this out, yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and advocates for justice. It is an honor to stand before you today at this pivotal human trafficking conference in beautiful Napa County, California. As we gather here from diverse disciplines and backgrounds, united in our shared commitment to combat this heinous crime, I am reminded of the power that lies in our collective effort. So it's really wonderful to see you all here. Whether you are a seasoned professional in the field or individuals embarking on this journey to understand and address human trafficking for your very first time, your presence here signifies a dedication to creating a world free from exploitation and injustice. Together, we have the opportunity to learn, to collaborate, and to inspire action that will make a tangible difference in the lives of those affected by this grave violation of human rights. Thank you for being part of this crucial conversation, and let us embark on this journey together with courage, compassion, and unwavering resolve. I stand here before you today, not just as a survivor of human trafficking, but as a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. My journey from victim to survivor has been marked by pain, trauma, and challenges, but it also has been defined by courage, strength, and the unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. As a survivor who was trafficked as a vulnerable teenager, my presence at this conference is not merely symbolic. It is a statement of defiance against the forces that sought to silence me, exploit me, and erase my humanity. By standing here today, I reclaim my voice, my agency, and my right to be seen and heard. But more than that, I stand here as a beacon of hope for others who may still be trapped in the shadows of exploitation and abuse. This conference is not just a gathering of minds and voices. It is a platform for change, a space where survivors, like myself, can share our stories, advocate for justice, and hopefully inspire others to join the fight against human trafficking. It is a reminder that our past does not define us, but our actions in the present can shape a brighter future for ourselves and for those who come after us. For me personally, this conference is a chance to turn my pain into purpose, my trauma into triumph, and my silence into a powerful call to action. It is an opportunity to connect with fellow survivors if they identify themselves to me, allies, and advocates to learn from each other, support each other, and stand together in solidarity against the forces of darkness that seek to exploit and destroy. So as we gather here today, let us remember that the fight against human trafficking is not just a battle of laws and policies, but a struggle for the very soul of humanity. Let us stand together, united in our commitment to justice, compassion, and freedom. And let us never forget that our voices, our stories, and our actions have the power to change the world. I was a young soul, vulnerable and longing for love, when I crossed paths with a man much older than me. He saw my innocence as an opportunity, preying on my lack of love and supervision, as well as the harsh reality of extreme poverty that surrounded me. Little did I know, I was not his first victim, nor would I be his last. The roots of my trauma story extend far beyond my own lifetime, reaching back to the experiences of my ancestors who endured historical oppression. Their struggles and the traumas they faced have had a profound impact on my own life, shaping my identity and influencing the challenges I have faced. By recognizing the historical context of my trauma, I gain a deeper understanding of its origins and the intergenerational effects it's had on my family. And I like to share that quote after I show that picture of my family, because a lot of victims and survivors of human trafficking come from historical oppression, colonization, historical trauma. And I know slavery is something that's really uncomfortable to talk about, so don't worry, I'm not gonna go on a whole speech about slavery, but I will tell you this, that was my great-great-great-grandmother. It wasn't thousands of years ago. That was my great-great-great-grandmother. You hear me? Just 3 greats. And so you can imagine, you know, we don't have to have a whole lesson to know slavery was horrible. And if it was certain people's just great-great-great-grandparents, there's probably still a huge impact on those families. Not only on those families in terms of the trauma the family has suffered, but people that enslaved those families, they didn't disappear. They're here in our society too, right? And so that, you know, complicates my victimization based on my identity and the intersections of that identity. The manipulation, it began slowly. Insidiously, he started by sexually abusing me and convincing me that what we shared was a relationship. Despite the stark age gap of 20 years between us, he wove a web of deceit and control around me, isolating me from my family and moving me away from everything familiar. I found myself dependent on him for my most basic needs, trapped in a cycle of abuse that escalated from sexual exploitation to the horrors of commercial sexual exploitation. In the depths of my despair, I was poor and desperate for love and attention, willing to endure unspeakable pain in exchange for fleeting moments of false affection. The darkness seemed endless, the weight of my suffering unbearable. But within me burned a flicker of resilience, a spark of defiance against the darkness that threatened to consume me. With each passing day, I found the strength to reclaim my voice, to defy the chains that bound me, and to envision a future beyond the confines of my trauma. Today, I stand before you, and I am not just a survivor. I am a warrior, a beacon of hope for those who will still walk in the shadows of exploitation and abuse. My story is a testament to the power of resilience, the beauty of healing, and the transformative force of love and solidarity. Together, let us stand united in our commitment to create a world where no one has to endure the horrors of exploitation and abuse. Let us all be beacons of light for those who still are finding their way out of the darkness. And let us never forget that within each survivor lies a story of courage, strength, and unwavering hope. In the past 20 years, my life's work has been dedicated to combating the howling issue of child sex trafficking, both in California and across the nation. Through unwavering dedication and a deep sense of purpose, I founded a nonprofit organization in Oakland, California, providing crucial support to young victims and survivors of sex trafficking. That was back in 2007. My efforts extended beyond direct services as I played a pivotal role in shaping policies and implementing training programs for sex trafficked youth in the Bay Area and Los Angeles County. Over the last decade, my journey has evolved as I transitioned to developing comprehensive curricula and training programs for professionals in the field through my consultancy company, Nola Brantley Speaks. This transition allowed me to amplify my impact, reaching a broader audience and equipping individuals with the knowledge and tools needed to effectively combat human trafficking. As a survivor myself, this journey has been both challenging and really empowering. It has been a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of turning pain into passion. My personal experience has fueled my commitment to fighting human trafficking, driving me to advocate tirelessly for those who have been silenced and marginalized. Sex and labor trafficking are two insidious forms of exploitation that plague our society, robbing individuals of their freedom and dignity. While both are deeply concerning, today I will shed light on the dark reality of sex trafficking with a particular focus on the heartbreaking issue of child sex trafficking. Child sex trafficking is a heinous crime that preys on the most vulnerable members of our society, our children. These young victims are often lured, coerced, and forced into the commercial sex trade, where they endure unimaginable trauma and abuse. It is crucial to understand the profiles of child sex trafficking victims, the risk factors that make them susceptible to exploitation, and the devastating impact it has on their lives. Child sex trafficking victims come from diverse backgrounds, but they often share common vulnerabilities, such as a history of abuse, homelessness, or involvement in the child welfare system. Traffickers exploit these vulnerabilities using manipulation, coercion, and even violence to control their victims and ultimately profit from their suffering. The impact of child sex trafficking is profound and it is long-lasting, affecting every aspect of a victim's life, physical, emotional, and psychological. These young survivors face immense challenges in rebuilding their lives, overcoming their trauma, and reclaiming their sense of self-worth. As we dive deeper into the complexities of child sex trafficking, it is essential to recognize the urgent needs of these victims, the need for safety, support, and healing. We must work tirelessly to provide comprehensive services and resources to help survivors recover and thrive, ensuring that they are not only rescued from exploitation, but also empowered to lead fulfilling and independent lives. Okay, so I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into child sex trafficking, and I want you to know this is not a pretty subject, okay? So, like the DA said, if you need to step outside, no one's judging you, it's okay, we're human, and we have human emotions, and sometimes things that are new to us can be quite overwhelming, and that's okay. You don't have to worry about stepping out the room and missing something. This is not the only opportunity. This is the first one, not the last one, in terms of the conference through the Justice Center, but also just your opportunity to engage in this topic if you so choose. So if you need to step out, please do. We'll start off with this brief video.
Amsterdam,
South America,
Vietnam,
Thailand,
China,
Mexico. I would say primarily outside the U.S.
American children are bought and sold in prostitution here in the United States. It doesn't just happen in other countries.
I think of the criminal act of capturing people.
And they get drugged and put in vans when they're kidnapped.
Fake advertisements for, models, that kind of thing, and then they just are intimidated or beaten and taken away, I guess.
American kids from all different backgrounds have been and can be victimized in prostitution, although frequently they are kids who are from a foster care background, who have abuse and neglect in their family history, or runaway and homeless children living on the street. These are kids who it is really easy for pimps and traffickers to recruit and force into prostitution.
Mostly girls.
Little girls that are taken in vans from other countries.
Generally underprivileged women.
Boys are sexually exploited too in the United States, perhaps in the same percentages that girls are exploited. We need more research on the subject, but the bottom line is that boys are sex trafficked in the US too. For over 20 years, Pet USA has been working to make sure that no child is bought and sold and used for sex, because it happens here too. Please visit our website at petusa.org and find out how you can join us in the fight to end child sex trafficking.
And ECPAC USA is a really great organization. If you don't know about them, they work a lot around child sex tourism. And if you don't know what child sex tourism is, it's when mostly American men think they're slick, and they think, oh, why don't I go to another country where people are even more vulnerable and pay to have sex with a 6-year-old? But when you're an American, it doesn't matter where you go to, it's illegal to have sex with children. So ECPAC USA has a unique focus on that, and they try to get to the hospitality industry in those countries, the transportation industry, to let them know what to look out for, like when different events are happening, or when they find out through the underground black market that these tours have been organized, because they're actually tours that are organized. They try to go into those areas and do the prevention work or the intervention work. So I really love them. They also have these tags you can purchase and put on your luggage, like luggage tags, so people can know that you're aware of this issue. So if somebody was in an airport and saw your tag and they were in trouble, they can know that you're someone that's aware, and they can maybe try to see if they can get support from you or help from you. So really great organization. So back in 2000, many years ago now, 24 years ago, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act passed at a federal level. That was our federal legislation that was about protecting victims and prosecuting, perpetrators. And in this legislation, it covered both labor and sex trafficking. And that's where the term commercially sexually exploited child came from. It came from the federal legislation. That's where it said if a kid is under 18 and this happens, they are considered the most severe form of a human trafficking victim, because they're a kid that's being bought and sold for sex, right? And the reason why I have this point highlighted for you all is because this part's important. See, if you're over 18 and you're in the commercial sex industry, you have to be able to prove or convince law enforcement that you are under force, fraud, or coercion, that you're not doing this of your own free choice, because if you are, it could be considered a crime, depending on how they view it. But if you're under 18, that's not supposed to be a question according to this law. If you're under 18, it don't matter if you walk up to a trafficker and say, "Hi, trafficker, can you please traffic me?" It wouldn't matter. Because you're under 18, it's illegal. Even though that's not usually the case. Usually the kids are being tricked, coerced, manipulated, all of that. But even if they weren't, it would still be a crime. And this could be really hard for people to understand, because this law passed in 2000. It wasn't until 17 years later that our state passed a state law that said, "Hey guys, stop arresting these kids." So 17 years after this law passed in our state, we were still arresting children as 647B prostitutes when they weren't even old enough to consent to sex in our state. And I want the young folks especially to hear this. Don't think because we have a law, it protects people, okay? Getting a law down is the first step, and it's important, but it's only the first step. It doesn't mean that law is protecting people. It takes a lot of advocacy, follow-up, monitoring, a lot of work to make sure that the laws really protect the people that we need them to protect, which are those who are the most vulnerable. Okay, so it's important to know this, especially for those of you who may be doing direct services, right? If you have people over 18, they would need to be able to, prove that they were doing this under distress, right? Under 18, that same proof is not needed for them to be qualified as a survivor. This law was reauthorized many times. I'm not even sure 2017 was the last time, but it does live under the Violence Against Women and Children Act now, if you want to find it in its totality. So in terms of definition, so sexual exploitation versus commercial sexual exploitation. So with sexual exploitation, this is where you have a young person who is under age of 18. Sometimes the young people themselves will refer to it as survival sex. We shouldn't refer to it as survival sex, because if any kid you love was in a horrible situation where they were exchanging sex for food and shelter from inappropriate adults, I don't think you'd call that survival sex. It'd be rape, abuse, horrible, kidnapping, and everything else if it was our kids, you know what I mean? So we have to think about all kids as our kids when things are happening to them especially. So it's okay if they use that term. They're using that term to reduce shame, to say I'm only doing this to survive. We don't want to use that term. We want to be correct in our language that they are sexually abused, and if you want to be more specific, sexually exploited. The difference between being sexually exploited and commercially sexually exploited is the commercial aspect. See, when you're sexually exploited, someone's just benefiting off your body and your sex because you don't have basic needs met. When you're commercially sexually exploited, and you'll see on the next few slides, they may be doing both, but they're definitely profiting financially. And they might also be sexually abusing you and profiting that way as well, because it's often the case. But what I want you to notice here on this slide is it's not just about the tangible things. I mean, any of us that have raised kids or that have kids now, do you think your kids can survive with just food, clothing, and shelter and no love, attention, or affirmation? But oftentimes we judge other kids who are trafficked, for example, for love. We're like, well, they had a place to live. They did. And love for children is like the air we breathe. You know what I mean? So, and I say this as a child. I was 13 years old the first time I came to my mom and asked her why she had never said that she loves me. So I know the real vulnerability that not experiencing love can create. And my mom went into the New York State foster care system when she was 3 years old. By the time she was 12 years old, she had sliced both of her wrists open trying to take her own life. So I also understand the vulnerability of our systems, you know what I mean, and the impact that can have on one's life. So it's really important that we understand that, yes, someone can be sexually exploited because they don't have food, clothing, and shelter, but it can also be that love, attention, and affirmation. Remember, we're talking about children. So children very much need that love, attention, and affirmation. So now that we go to commercial sexual exploitation of children, this is where you have the child, you have the person that's profiting from the child's exploitation, and then you have a person that is sexually abusing the child. I'll give you a graphic in a minute. This could be any child, any gender, any background. I have, advocated for kids that came from foster care, juvenile justice, and the poorest parts of the community. I have advocated for kids whose living rooms were bigger than any house I had ever lived in my whole life. You know what I mean? So this can happen absolutely to any kid. To be honest, and this will come up later, but I'll just say it now too, the most common denominator that I've seen amongst all survivors of child sex trafficking has been their earlier history of childhood sexual abuse. My father was a pedophile and started having sex with me before I could walk or talk. And I wish I could be like, oh, that was so uncommon. From being around survivors of sex trafficking, like I said, the most common thing they share is not foster care, it's not juvenile justice, it's not anything. It's their sexual abuse history, both male and female. Another uncomfortable thing we don't want to talk about, but it's what drives victims and makes them so vulnerable to sex trafficking. It's like, if you were sexually abused as a kid, especially if it happened, over time, which oftentimes it does for kids, it was like you were in training for the commercial sex industry. So when they got a hold of you, they didn't have to do all the work they might have to do with somebody else, because somebody else, sadly, already did the work. And so that's really important for us to understand that it could be any kid, because that can happen to any kid. And it does happen to all types of kids. The kid is treated as a commercial and sexual object, and this is really important for you providers to know of services, Because if the kid comes in all like with an attitude and they act like they don't need help, it's like it's not obvious they're a victim, right? But that's because they're not being told they're a victim. They're being told, like I thought I was somebody's girlfriend even though I was 15 and the person was 35, right? Because you can be manipulated when you're a kid like that. So they're being told that, you know, and even though they may be treated like a commercial and sexual object, they may be listening to the words and holding on to that even over what they're experiencing. Because that's what you can do when you're desperate to hear good things and to feel good things. We also have to know that this is definitely a form of violence against children. Even if violence isn't used to get them in initially, violence will be in the scenario. For all the years that I've worked in trafficking, every year that I did direct service, I lost a child. Every year I did direct service, a child's life was lost. I never got through 1 year of providing these services where I didn't lose a child that was, you know, receiving services from me or somebody else at the agency. And when I went to, that was here in the Bay Area, and then I got recruited to Los Angeles and went out there for about a decade to help them, and it was the same thing. Every year they would lose a kid, and because I already had the experience of losing kids, I would go and gather with all the judges and all the probation officers and social workers and just try to process, right, how quickly we were losing some of these kids and how close they were, you know, getting to them and trying to provide services. It was really difficult for people. So it is a form of violence against children, and some of the violence and the levels of violence they experience, they won't not disclose for years to come. People think, I think sometimes people think that you give the worst stuff up, but you don't. The worst stuff, you hold on to it for a long time. You know what I mean? And some of the worst stuff you never ever say in your life. So when you're working with someone, don't assume that like, you know the worst is the worst and you're working with them from that place. You don't know the depths of people's darkness. You only know what they've been able to share. You know, I would just always assume there's more. You know what I'm saying? That's the safest place to come from. So with commercial sexual exploitation, like I said, you have the kid, you have the person who's buying the sex, you know, from the kid, and then you have the person who's exploiting the kid. So they're profiting from, you know, that. But oftentimes, especially with the young ladies, the person exploiting them is also sexually abusing them. So they're being sexually abused by the person that's exploiting them, and then they're being sexually abused by the customers who are paying to sexually abuse them. There's lots of examples of the commercial sex industry. You can see many of them here, everything from street prostitution to the internet, pornography, gang-based prostitution, stripping, erotic nude massage, escort services, phone sex lines, private parties, interfamilial pimping, which is when family members are trafficking their family member, and child sex tourism, which I just talked to you all about a little bit ago. So there's lots of different areas of the commercial sex industry, and child pornography has never been legal. Sometimes people just see that word pornography, their first reaction is, isn't pornography legal? And it's like, it's not legal when it's kids, and it's still part of the commercial sex industry, even if it's legal. All right, so this video is brief, but it's a little heavy. It's a poem by a survivor. They're reciting it, and it's a poem that they wrote kind of about their experience. So just want to give you a little heads up.
She was 4 years old the first time a man looked at her the way a man looks at his wife on their wedding day. Little girls are supposed to dream about being models and doctors and veterinarians. Instead, she fought sleep, eyes wide with terror of another night greeted by her stepfather's shadow. He was a real monster in her bedroom, and Mom, she was too fragile, too selfish to accept the truth that her little girl's innocence had been stolen one night when her boyfriend decided she wasn't good enough anymore. And since the little girl never had a real father, she accepted his advances because he always promised her his touches were acceptable, because he loved her. When you don't know yourself and you don't love yourself, you will fall for anything that sounds like love and feels like love. She was a walking corpse, stained with the fingerprints of strangers. And all she wanted was to walk the earth without the heaviness, the weight of all the men who tore a piece of her and took it with them. She never made it to see her 18th birthday. This is for the pain, for the stains that bad water won't wash away, for the scars left on the hearts of the fatherless child. This is for the girls objectified instead of praised like queens. This is for the agony, growing up without a father, but all you really want is love, and you don't understand love. So one day when some guy stops you in a train station or a street corner and tells you you're beautiful, you are quickly intrigued. You like the fact that someone notices you, and you will do anything to feel like he's everything, and he promises you everything, and the things he convinces you to do, They don't seem that bad if afterwards he shows you how much he loves you. Your morals are abandoned on that sidewalk where you turned your first trick. Your beauty is left in that hotel room where some stranger touched you like his girlfriend and then left the money on the nightstand. And every night, you die again, compromising your worth for what your pimp calls love and security. The hustle, the streetlights, the schemes, it never seems worth it, but you have the liquor to comfort your fears. And as long as your profits meet expectations, you will have what you always wanted your whole life. Love. Love that doesn't feel right, but it's all you think you're worth, so you take it every day. You sleep when the sun comes up, rise when the sun is down. Conceal the torrent with makeup and stylish hairdos. Put on your best outfits, something arousing because you have to make them happy. The men, the tricks, the pimps. This is for the pain. This is for America. In hopes that you will notice that 12-year-old girl who was forced to trade her lunchbox and sneakers for a Chanel purse and pumps. This is for the 16-year-old girl kidnapped by a gang of men on her way to school and held captive in a house right next door to you. This is for the 20-year-old girl who took her last beating today because she couldn't bring herself to let another man hold her down and violate her. We are all slaves for love, degrading ourselves for acceptance of a man that's the closest thing to a father figure we've ever known. We were once just girls with aspirations and a small piece of hope. Now who will notice us? Who will save America's daughters?
The number that's going to appear on the screen is to the Human Trafficking Resource Hotline. That's ran through the Polaris Project in Washington, D.C. So providers can call that line, and they can also go on the National Human Trafficking Resource Hotline website, and it gives you resources. So you can look like, hey, I'm in Napa, and I have a victim of labor trafficking or sex trafficking. It will give you the resources in that area. You know, they do a pretty good job of trying to reach out locally. So if you guys are a resource too, call them so you can get on that list, okay? Because that's how people in your area. I was a small nonprofit. We were only staffed of 20, but we would still get clients from that list because we always make sure that we were, on that list because we know people call the hotline. Not all survivors or victims call the hotline, but some do. And then they can also call directly, and they can text the hotline directly as well to be connected with a provider or housing or, whatever the need may be. So that's just a resource that you all should be aware of. All right, so we don't want to use the word like a sex worker or teenage prostitute or child prostitute when talking about children who are being sexually abused and exploited, because it sends the wrong message. And how people, hi Carla, how they hear that message is also going to be how they process those kids, how those kids move through the systems. And so the language that I just introduced to you, sexually exploited, and remember that would be when there's not someone making a profit, right? But there is somebody having sex with a child in exchange for meeting one of their basic needs. And then commercially sexually exploited is when there is a third person that's actually making a profit, right? We want to use those terms, and even if you say sex trafficked or, that's fine as well, but the word prostitute, even if you put teen in front of it or child in front of it, it has negative association. And people blame that person for their own victimization. So you want to stay away from that word, and instead you want to use these words that I've introduced you to today, because when you use words like commercially sexually exploited child sex trafficking victim, first of all, people think victim. They think trauma, they think deserves help, they think child. You know what I mean? It just sends them in the right direction, and the word prostitute sends them in the opposite direction. So it's really important that we change our language. I mean, I remember back in the days, it was wild, y'all. Like, people literally, and maybe you guys are at that stage right here in Napa County, so I better be careful what I say. But people did not understand that this was a form of child abuse. And the way we processed the kids did not make that clear. So for example, before 2017 in California, we were arresting kids. So now I have people confused. Well, is the kid the victim? Because on the police report, they're the suspect. So I'm trying to get them some victim of crime services, but you need to be the victim. And then, oftentimes it's between law enforcement to kind of negotiate, do they understand and see that as a form of victimization, you know what I mean? So hopefully we've moved beyond that now, because that was some years back. but it really is important that we realize that we still do need to be intentional about our language so people can continue to understand that when a child is being trafficked, they are not doing anything wrong. It is a form of child abuse and something wrong is being done to them. We just had some federal legislation go and the folks weren't happy about how it turned out. The idea was, and I mean, doesn't this sound like a great idea? If you're buying a kid for sex, it should be a felony, not a misdemeanor. I don't think that's rocket science, okay? So it goes up the pipeline. I train all the time, so they're lucky I don't have time to get in that arena. But right now I'm dedicated to my training arena. And I see all the advocates are in an uproar because I guess when it went up the food chain, they kicked it back and they wanted to say, if they're 16 or 17, listen to this. If they're 16 or 17, we don't want to make it a felony because we don't want to stop those children's ability from being able to take care of themselves if they need to. So now we're embracing 16 or 17-year-olds selling themselves instead of how we improve our systems of care to make sure they don't fall through these cracks. And that's happening right now today at a federal legislative level. So it's just really interesting, and what it is, it's the otherness, y'all. Because they're not thinking if they're 16 or 17-year-old, they're thinking of those 16 or 17-year-olds, which is why we can't afford to have that kind of thinking. That kind of thinking leads to harming the most vulnerable members of our society. So even when we're tempted to have it, I mean, I live in my little Walnut Creek bubble with my child who ain't never touched any of this, but yet I can't be unaware. Because when we're unaware, it's actually gonna hurt people. So making sure that folks know this is child abuse is critical. The reframing of the language also just really expresses the fact that these kids, they deserve help. And they've had a horrible experience, and we need the correct language to talk about this in so we can move forward towards making things better for these kiddos and just making a safer world for us all. This used to be another big question, which used to scare me. And this question sometimes would come from people at Children and Family Services. So I know, people aren't just like trying not to know. They got a genuine question. And me and my co-trainer, I train with all the time, she's a psychologist, she's in Texas right now. We were like, oh Lord, we were like, wait a minute. This word prostitution was messing them up, and they were forgetting these are kids being sexually abused. So let's back up, folks, here. Is it a mandated reporter issue if you know a kid is being sexually abused over and over again, and people are paying for it? Yes. 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 It is. Okay, so let's just clear that up. Suspected or confirmed. You don't have to have proof. That's not your job. Unless that is your job. But you know what I mean. You know me? That's not your job if it's not your job. So if you suspect any other kind of abuse, if you suspect, you report, and you let them do their job. And whatever opinion you have about how they do their job or don't do their job, they might have one about your agency too. Do the report and let them do their job. We're all human beings doing this work. There's no system, there's no the system, we're the system. According to the FBI, there are 13 major hubs for child sex trafficking in the United States, and unfortunately, 3 of them are in California, and 1 is right next door in Las Vegas, Nevada. The San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego metropolitan areas are all considered hotspots or hubs for child sex trafficking, and then right next door in Las Vegas, Nevada. So you can drive throughout our state and next door and hit up 4 of the 13 major hubs for child sex trafficking in our country. So we definitely have a unique problem in California. And yes, boys are trafficked too. They're oftentimes left out of the conversation. My work was primarily with girls, but they're left out of the conversation because of things like gender stereotypes, because of myths about male sexual abuse, and because of the failure to acknowledge that males can be victims. I'm really passionate about male sexual abuse because I think that males should not have to carry the burden of such pain and trauma throughout their lives. The average male doesn't disclose their abuse until between the ages of 30 and 40, after college, maybe after marriage, and even after having their own kids. Like, at least I feel like as a woman survivor I can talk to other women. It's not like it's not hard, it's still hard, but like we embrace each other and we kind of get it with each other. I don't know that a lot of men have found that same space in their journey, and so I just have a lot of passion and a lot of love for what men experience, because that manifests in a lot of behaviors that we then judge and oftentimes criminalize in some cases. But sadly, as you talk to a lot of men, especially in our, for example, criminal justice system, many of them are also survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Childhood sexual abuse is a ugly, messy thing that really interrupts people's lives and creates a lot of problems, especially if they don't get the help and treatment they need after it occurs, or if they're not even able to tell anybody, and they have to internalize all of that has happened to them. That can really be disastrous to people's mental health, to their physical health, to their spiritual health. So we're going to hear a poem from Dr. John A. King. He's a male survivor of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and sex trafficking. I started sharing this poem years ago because I wanted people to hear directly from a survivor of sexual abuse who was male, and I used to read his poem. I'm glad I don't have to read it no more because I would embody his poem, and it's a very heavy poem. So then I found his video. No, I found him through social media, and then we contacted, and I got his video, so now we get to hear directly from John. The poem is heavy. He's just going to read the poem. It'll just be him reading the poem. But it is a heavy poem, so I just want to give you a heads up.
The moon is black and the ground is cold. She wants to get out of town. He wants to get laid. Do you see him? He is two. He is her gorgeous boy. Blonde hair, brown eyes, giggling, standing, falling, never giving in. Do you see him? He is 4. He's a playful boy. He's playing a game Daddy likes to watch too. They put food in Mummy's nana and he has to get it out with his tongue. Do you see him? He is 5. He's a naughty boy. They are putting his little green soldiers in and out of his bottom really hard and fast to teach him to put his toys away. Do you see him? He is 7. He is a lying boy. He is hiding in the bushes next door. That is just not true. No mother would do something like that to her son. They tell him as they drag him home. Do you see him? He is 9. He's a good boy. He crawls under their dresses and makes her friends tingle, just like you do for Mummy. Sometimes they even take pictures. Do you see him? He is 11. He is a naked boy. Daddy watches as the other men laugh at his hairless body. They take turns pulling his dick to make it grow. The pliers hurt the most. Do you see him? He is 13. He is a lonely boy. The scout leader says, "Let me hold it for you." That's how we become friends. Do you see him? He is 45. He is a screaming man. Curled in a ball, sobbing, body shudders with memories that are shattering his soul, breaking his mind. Do you see him? He is 50, a broken man, nursing a bottle and sucking a barrel. Do you see him? He is 53. He is a relentless man. His ass will always bleed, and his eyes will never be dry. Do you see him? He is a survivor too. That'll be fun.
So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that sometimes it can have even a deeper impact on us when we hear from a male survivor of sexual abuse, because we're not necessarily used to hearing from male survivors. So just want to give everybody a minute, just take a breath. You've taken a lot in so far. I'm a lot. So just want to give you a minute to take a breath before I dive back in. While trafficking affects all demographics, traffickers frequently target individuals who lack strong support networks, are facing financial strains, have experienced violence in the past, or who are marginalized by society without adequate community support, youth who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning may be at a particular risk for sex trafficking. So again, that's the name of the game for traffickers, the most vulnerable people in our society. Who is society throwing away? Who is society forgetting about? That's who the traffickers go for. So if that's the abused kid, great. You know what I'm saying? If that's the unaccompanied minor, perfect. If that's the LGBTQ plus youth that someone threw out the home or is not accepting, awesome. That all feeds into people that are vulnerable and forgotten about that become prey for not just traffickers, but lots of people that are out there. The streets are not nice. I'm pointing out a few different groups that I want to highlight in terms of their vulnerability. Boys was the first group there that I highlighted. The second one was our LGBTQ plus youth. I also want to highlight our Native youth. They have experienced colonization that has resulted in a loss of land, traditions, religion, identity, culture, relatives, and so much more, which has created a lot of the conditions within their own families of generational trauma that creates so many of the vulnerabilities for trafficking. And they are disproportionately impacted by trafficking. There's also a large number of Native individuals that have been murdered or who are missing, and they are logging their own database because those cases are not logged into our Department of Justice database. Like, we're logging in like 1% of those cases. Also, our African American youth, and I kind of already shared with that through my own story and touched on slavery briefly there. And so I don't want to revisit that, but just want to highlight that there's a disproportionate number of African American youth as well experiencing trafficking for the reasons that I talked about, because African Americans are their great grandmother out of slavery in the United States of America. Youth migrating as unaccompanied minors are inherently vulnerable to exploitation through the migration process, or may become victims of commercial sexual exploitation on arriving at their destination through being forced to pay back debts to traffickers. And this is a big growing problem right now. And I mean a problem that they're not being taken care of, not a problem that they're coming over here. Because the number of unaccompanied minors that are coming across our borders now in the past 5 years, I don't know if it's doubled, quadrupled, or went to 4 times. But trust me, y'all, it is huge now. And imagine kids without no adult showing up here, and then, I mean, I don't know if you follow the news reports, but there's so much going on in those facilities where they're getting sent to and they're being processed out and they can't find half of them, and it's just wild. So those kids are really vulnerable to something like sex trafficking or labor trafficking. I mean, some of them might be getting placed right in the sex trafficker's home, and then no one's going to follow up on them because they cannot, they haven't figured out a system to make sure all these kids are safe. I'll just say that. We also have our undocumented youth. They can have some unique risk factors as well. Their exploitation and abuse can go unseen or unreported. They can have the exploitation be viewed as a taboo topic in their community, and the person that is exploiting can even be seen as someone that people are looking up to in the community because of the conditions being so bad on the other side. There could be fear of deportation for their self, for their family or community, so just don't want to reach out for help because you don't want to bring any attention to yourself or your community when you have that fear of deportation. And then when they do try to seek services, there could be the language barriers and the institutional barriers that can get in the way. We also have our youth with intellectual disabilities, and they can be at an increased risk because of, like, so many things. One, how it'll be more difficult for them to recognize they were getting manipulated by somebody, for example, online, trying to get them to get together in person. Their kind of lack of awareness around exploitation and its danger. How people, like even the people that are well attended, they don't teach kids with intellectual disabilities about their sexual self. And so they don't know anything, so that they don't have the right information to protect themselves. And then sometimes when they try to self-disclose to law enforcement, they're kind of like, nobody wants to have sex with you because you have a disability. And not all law enforcement, obviously, but in many cases, enough for it to show up in the research. You know what I mean? So that's another group that's at an increased vulnerability. I also want you all to know that in the state of California, we have the biggest intersection between gangs and sex trafficking in our nation. Nearly 1 in 5 arrested for exploitation in our state was gang affiliated, and so that's really important for us to understand. And I mean, I worked in Southern California, and so first I was up north, I didn't really see the gang implication with trafficking, but when I went down south, there's a huge gang implication that spreads up into the Central Valley. So even when you get to like the Fresno area, there's like a huge gang implication in trafficking there as well. And so I think it's just always something we have to be wary of. When I came back to the Bay Area from being in LA for 10 years. When I left Oakland, there might have been like 20 gangs in Oakland. You know, Oakland is not that big. When I came back, I sat down with the DA at the time. 59 individual gangs operating in that one little city. And so now there's a big, and now when I left Oakland 10 years before to go to LA, there was not an intersection between gangs and trafficking in Oakland at all. I was deep in the trenches of all the work. When I came back and started training people, I had counselors from the schools asking me, saying, Nola, we have, kids at the school that are, in exploitation through a gang and they're needing help on how to get out. And that was a question I had never been asked in all those years before in the Bay Area. So just want to, just put that on your mind that there is that intersection of gangs, especially here in California, and that makes things much, 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 much more dangerous. Where does recruitment occur? Well, the short answer would be anywhere that kids are at. But, more specifically, schools, neighborhoods, the mall, outside of county buildings, especially buildings that deal with child welfare and probation matters, group homes, foster care homes, bus stops, especially bus stops like Greyhound, where a kid might jump on the bus trying to get away from something and get somewhere else. And then, of course, the internet, social media, and apps are what I call the equal opportunity recruiter and exploiter, because they could essentially get to anybody's kid. So even if your kid doesn't share the same risk factors with other people's kids, if they're online, they do. And so that is why I call it the equal opportunity recruiter and exploiter. So a few risk factors here. One big one is running away. When kids run away, they are in need of everything. And sadly, there are inappropriate adults that are out there willing to offer them everything with the bad intention in mind. In 2021, NIC assisted more than 25,000 cases of missing youth. That same year, 1 in 6 runaways was likely commercially sexually exploited. So there's this strong connection between runaways and sex trafficking. So if you want to get on the prevention end, when kids run away in your county, develop a strategy. You want to intervene. You want to recognize that when kids are running away, there is a problem. It's not the kid. There's something going on. Kids like to be in your house, getting on your nerves, eating your food. So when they're running away and being uncomfortable and figuring out places to sleep, something's going on, even if it's not obvious at first. And those kids who are running away can be perfect candidates for trafficking if we don't find ways to intervene. 92% of all the kids who ran from the care of social services in 2020 were likely victims of child sex trafficking. So when it gets to kids that are specifically through social services, then that potential of them being trafficked when they run away, it gets even higher. There's lots of risk factors to child sex trafficking. Some of the individual ones are here, things like poverty, abuse, drug and alcohol abuse, physical abuse. I told you already that the most common denominator I've personally seen has been sexual abuse. You can see how high the stats are here, 65 to 80%. In the work I've done, it's been like 98% of the kids I've seen were sexually abused during earlier childhood. We also have to be aware of teen relationship violence, because that can look like, oh, it's just teen relationship violence. It can actually be a kid that's getting groomed for sex trafficking, so you just want to be really aware of that. I want to show you this. It's something that, we would have to have much more time for you to learn more about, but I just think this is such an important visual for you to see. This is how it happens most of the time. You know how I shared my story of kind of earlier childhood sexual abuse, and then that kind of leading to thinking I was in a relationship with him, to then leading to commercial sexual exploitation? Very common. Traveling the continuum from sexual abuse to sexual exploitation to commercial sexual abuse is what I've seen most commonly with kids. So understanding this is crucial, because within it also lies some of the treatment responses. If we know what's being damaged the most during trafficking, we know what needs to be restored, and that is really important. And we don't have to wait till they're restored to work on it. As soon as they've been sexually abused, boom, we start doing the work, so hopefully they won't travel farther down the continuum. But even if we meet them when they're all the way on the opposite end of it, it's still the same work we have to do at a different level of intensity, because they've had more of the experience. There's also environmental risk factors, like the presence of the adult sex industry. Wherever there are adults being sold for sex, there are also children being sold for sex. Transient male population, that would be men who are coming in and out of areas with the sense of being anonymous. Truck stops, military bases, conference centers, anything that brings in that crowd. It's not just sporting events. I remember when we went up north, they were having the International Agricultural Festival. Me and my co-trainer were up there training. The festival hadn't even started yet, and they had arrested 6 men that were trying to pick up child sex trafficking victims. And agricultural festival hadn't even started yet. They were pre-gaming. Just ridiculous. There's also the environmental risk factor of both poverty and violence, as well as the subculture of homeless youth, when they're kind of in that survival sex mentality, you know? And proximity to borders, and not just international borders. This could be state borders, this could be city borders. There could be a lot of implications at borders. Lastly, we have social risk factors, objectification and sexualization of our young women. We got all the isms, sexism, racism, classism, gender inequality, homophobia and transphobia. And then we have this glorification in our culture of pimping that happens. As well as, we live in America, it's a capitalistic nation, and materialism is definitely at the center of our world, and that is a contributing factor to the commercial sex industry, especially when you have people that also live in our nation that live in extreme poverty. I was a kid that spent my childhood observing, but never participating, and it's a painful existence. I grew up in San Francisco, so I'd go to Union Square, I'd watch people ice skate, I'd watch people shop, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'd watch all of those things, but I couldn't do them just close enough to see it, just far enough away not to experience it. You know what I mean? So it's something that really can drive people to do some things that if you've always had stuff of privilege, you're like, I don't understand why someone would do that for that. Well, of course you wouldn't. How would you if you have not been in a situation to be that desperate or to have that kind of lack, right? When you don't have a lot, material things take on more meaning than they should. My daughter's always had a lot, so like she don't care about anything. Like she don't care for the $10 pair of shoes or a $10,000 pair of shoes. If she wants them, she wants them, but it's not because of the cost. You know, it's just because she's just spoiled and wants what she wants. But when you haven't had anything, then the cost of something, the fact that something is like, oh wow, this has a value, it becomes a much bigger deal. We're gonna watch this brief video. I don't think it'll be super triggering, but most of my videos are. But this video specifically, because I want you to watch at least one video on pornography, because pornography is considered the public health crisis of the digital age. And a lot of people that buy children for sex, they first watch pornography a lot before they then purchase a human being in the commercial sex industry. Because when people watch pornography, the part of their brain that lights up is the part that deals with objects, not human beings.
I think people think that watching pornography is okay because they say, well, everybody has consented to it and they're all paid actors and they're consenting adults, so it's fine. But the reality is, and I've heard this from survivors, and what they really want all porn consumers to know is that when you are watching pornography, you actually have no way of knowing if you're watching somebody being raped or voluntarily engaging in that act.
Pornography is really prostitution on screen. The traffickers are the same, the pimps are the same, the women and girls and men and boys are the same victims that are being sold in the sex trade.
There isn't pornography over here, prostitution over here, and trafficking over there. They're interlinked.
The most interesting study I read is one that did brain scans of men while they were watching pornography. And they wanted to see what areas of the brain light up when men look at porn. It's the part of the brain that deals with objects, not people. And why that is so devastating is the more we dehumanize someone, the more possible it is to commit violence against them.
When you see someone being really brutalized in pornography, that really has to be done to someone in order to film that. Sometimes we could call something sex trafficking, but if you photograph it, then it becomes pornography. And if it happens on a date, then it's rape. When in fact, we're really talking about the same kind of sexual violence and exploitation.
In our society, we glamorize the issue of trafficking. We glamorize pimping. We think that a pimp is someone that's cool, like we'll have shows like Pimp My Ride or Pimp My House, and it appears to make something look good. But what is the reality of a pimp? A pimp is someone that abuses women, that rapes women, and is that something that we want to associate something positive with? My trafficker was someone that I met while crossing the street. He didn't say to me that, I am the big bad pimp, you're gonna come with me, I'm gonna beat you and abuse you and do all these things to you. He was very nice in his approach. I had no idea that he was a trafficker until I shared with him, hey,
I needed money to go back to school, and he said, I'll help you.
He grooms her, tells her he loves her, builds a connection, builds a dependence on him. And then he says, if you love me, you'll not only sleep with me, you'll take care of my friends.
Almost all of them have had pictures or videos taken of them, whether it's been sold as pornography or not.
Pornography is used to desensitize the individuals involved in the sex trade. It is used to normalize violence and reduce the individual that's being bought to what's on that screen.
Pornography was oftentimes used as some sort of advertising for their sexual abuse.
Pretty much every trafficking victim I've ever seen, pornography has been created of them. These are 12, 13, 14-year-olds. It is considered sex trafficking anytime a child is being sold for any type of monetary value in the United States. So when people say child prostitute, that's absolutely an incorrect term for them. It is always sex trafficking.
We've done some recoveries of young people where they were lured by modeling and eventually end up in a situation where they were forced to make pornographic films.
Trafficking is a symptom of a problem. It's a supply response to a demand problem. And so if we can address that demand problem, we can really solve a lot of these other issues.
I really wish that people who watch porn knew more about that, because I think they believe that they're engaging in this activity in a very passive way, and they're like, oh, I'm doing it in the privacy of my own home, and this is just a video that I'm watching, and they're not associating it with the fact that pornography is very often the filmed rape of sex trafficking victims.
When you look at pornography, what we're seeing is a cultural acceptance of that type of commercial sexual exploitation. What we don't think about is who are the actors and what are the elements that are contributing to this multi-billion-dollar sex industry.
I also wanted to share this with you. It's a screenshot posted by a player who killed a prostitute with the hatchet to get their money back. Because on this video game, you can purchase a prostitute and have sex with her, but then after you purchase her and have sex with her, you can also then kill her with the hatchet to get your money back. Grand Theft Auto 5 was the best-selling console video game of 2013 in Northern America, Latin America, and Europe combined. As of March 2020, Grand Theft Auto 5 has sold 135 million copies. By March 21, revenue from GTA 5 was expected to be over $3 billion. And sadly, I have went into foster care and group homes, both run by probation and by social services, and have witnessed kids playing this game. And it's not just the system. I've also witnessed kids that aren't in the system at all playing this game that shouldn't be playing it either. You know, with adults who are allowing them to play it. But the bottom line is, it's many of our kids, they don't have a lot of adults pouring into them. So things like this take on so much more weight. And I don't know how many of you play video games, but these video games, images and stuff nowadays, they are very lifelike. And our kids' minds are still developing. You know, so all of that could be really confusing to them. And they're seeing these things on the screen over and over again. Then how hard do you think it is to move from that screen to reality when you have lots of other negative factors existing in your life? It's not hard at all. Some of the pathways to entry include homelessness. So, you know, when someone ends up homeless, obviously they're in a desperate situation. It's kind of like if you ran away, right? The same thing, people see that you need help. Another one that I mentioned to you guys can be through what we call interfamilial pimping, or what I called out as family pimping here. And that's when someone in the family is actually profiting off of the child's exploitation. There can also be peer recruitment, and that's very common. It's one of the most common ways. And oftentimes kids are not recruiting because they're like, I'm about to make a profit off of you. They think they're helping a friend. They think they're showing another abused kid a way to get by, not realizing their own trauma, or the trauma they're about to introduce their friend to. But peer recruitment is one of the most common ways that kids get in. Why? Because kids have the most access to each other, and kids trust each other more than they trust adults. And yes, in some cases, traffickers do strategically use kids to recruit other kids. I just don't want you to think that's what's always happening, because sometimes the kid just thinks they're helping another kid out. There's also the internet and social media. Since about 2015, over half of the child sex trafficking cases have involved recruitment or trafficking starting online. So that's why I say we have to be aware for all children because of how often this is now happening, where it's initiated online. And when you think about the internet and social media, I also want you to think about gaming. Because young kids can be on games, okay? And sometimes we don't think about gaming, but we do need to think about gaming. So we're gonna watch this brief video. One, because I love this kid. This is my play nephew, he doesn't know it. And two, because I think it's really powerful for you to hear a young kid be so innocent and see how much risk he could have been at if his caretaker wasn't making sure that she knew what was going on with the video games. Because it's tempting to throw kids on games and kind of let them play and stay busy, but when they're online playing, that means they can be playing with anybody in the whole wide world. You gotta download stuff for them and let them play with the computer. It's safer.
Controls on your child's computer and smartphone are common and something you hear quite a bit about. But what about the Xbox, the Wii, or the PlayStation 2? The FBI estimates there are 750,000 child predators online, and the internet can give them the key into your house, basically. A gaming device can be a pretty easy way in. Psychiatrists say in the world of gaming, your child might not be so quick to detect danger because of a perception that they're actually interacting with a device and not a person on the other end.
She started saying to me, hey, send me a picture of you. And so I did.
They're asking for naked selfies or inappropriate videos. In the worst case scenarios, they're asking to meet the kids.
Investigators say parents who think a child has been contacted inappropriately should report it rather than confronting the perpetrator. Parents need to have their children's passwords for gaming consoles and keep an eye on their history whenever they can.
And clearly with a child that young, you don't need to ask the child why they sent the picture. Why do you have the child online unsupervised where someone could even request a picture from them and they can send it? You know, we have to protect our children. And sometimes we're asking the why to the wrong person. We don't ask the young person, why were you running away or why did you have that on? Why are there adults out seeking to have sex with children is the why. You know what I mean? So just making sure we're always asking the correct why. There is a why to ask, but make sure we're asking the correct why. There's also violence and kidnapping, unfortunately. About 15% of the clients I served when I did direct services were victims of what we call guerrilla pimps, like guerrilla warfare, where they didn't even have any previous contact with them. They literally stalked them out, kidnapped them, drugged them, raped them, and trafficked them. Very severe cases, very sad cases. And then for some of our population that is LGBTQ+, they may be more commonly approached by buyers. When they run away or become homeless, they may go to areas that are safer for them to be in as people that identify as LGBTQ+, which also tends to put a target on their back for anyone that's looking for folks that are at risk that fit that, that population. And so oftentimes they'll be approached directly by adults offering them money for sex. Another aspect of that population is many transgender individuals may feel they have no way to pay for gender-affirming medication or care, at least the ones who want it, may feel they have no way to do that because they're rejected from their families and communities, so they may see the commercial sex industry as the only way for them to achieve that. And if it's a kid, right, that's seeing that, there's usually an adult waiting to say, yep, you're right, let me take you under my wing and help you achieve your dreams, but they're really just looking to make a profit off of this already desperate young person. So there's a huge impact, obviously, of all of this. Too huge for me to cover in my time. I have to speak to you today, but I wanted to give you a glance that there's the spiritual impact. And if I was just to pick one thing off of that, I would say their loss of faith in humanity. And it really is our job to help restore their faith in humanity. There is the emotional impact. And I just say it takes a long time to recover from this stuff emotionally. I would say, embrace for your clients and for yourself if you're a survivor of trauma, but definitely your clients that survive human trafficking, embrace their healing as a lifelong journey for them. Help them embrace their healing as a lifelong journey. That will be a very wonderful thing. There's the social impact, especially for a kid. Imagine being a kid who's sex trafficked, and like kids aren't like, we're sorry you're sex trafficked. They're like, you a hoe. They're kids. You know what I mean? So we not only want to be aware of that, but we want to try to teach kids more empathy too about this stuff. We have a curriculum that we do around prevention for kids, and part of it is to teach them to like identify trafficking and avoid it. But the other part of the curriculum is to develop their empathy. So if another kid is trafficked, they're doing more than saying, you're a hoe. But they're actually understanding, oh wow, she might have been sexually abused, or he might have, experienced, this, that, or the other. And it's been really effective with the kids we've done it with, so I'm hopeful. I don't know if you know this, but there's a lack of empathy in today's youth because they don't have any time to daydream. I don't know if you know about the connection. But during the time that you daydream and you do nothing, that's when the areas of your brain that build empathy work. They make those connections. Because kids in today's culture, because many of us in today's culture, we're always busy. And so if we're not doing something, we're then on our cell phones. That means that we're not having the daydreaming time that allows our brains to build that empathy that we need, which can be really problematic for our young people. So when other young people are having something like this happen, that has a huge impact. And the internet and social media doesn't help. Although I am pro-internet and social media for our young people, I'm just saying. It doesn't help in that aspect. And then lastly, there is the physical impact, and that can be tremendous as well. I mean, you can see just from the snapshot on the screen, all of the things that are happening in terms of the physical impact. And for many of the youth, can you all hear me fine just like this? Because I don't really feel like the mic is on, and so I'm just gonna design. Okay, so for many of the youth, they'll have long-term health problems too. There's still youth I'm connected with who are in their 30s, and many of them, because a lot of the health problems when they were being trafficked weren't being attended to, they're dealing with health problems for many years to come. All right, so along with addressing CSEC 101, the last part of my talk here, I'm going to talk to you about the importance of trauma-informed practices in working with human trafficking victims and survivors. It is really important to discuss strategies and interventions to combat this crime, but it's also essential that we center our efforts on understanding and addressing the profound impact of trauma on those who experience exploitation and abuse, not just in trafficking, but more generally speaking as well. Trauma-informed care, it's not just a buzzword or a trend. It's a fundamental shift in how we approach and support survivors of human trafficking. It recognizes that trauma is not just an event, but a pervasive and enduring experience that can shape a person's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and relationships long after the trauma and abuse has ended. It acknowledges that trauma can manifest in a myriad of ways, from anxiety and depression to substance abuse and self-harm, and that each survivor's journey to healing is both unique and complex. As advocates and service providers, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to create safe, supportive, and empowering environments for survivors to both heal and thrive. This means moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach to care and instead adopting practices that are trauma-informed, survivor-centered, and culturally responsive. It means listening to survivors with empathy and compassion, validating their experiences, and honoring their resilience and agency in the face of unimaginable adversity. Trauma-informed care also requires us to recognize the interconnected nature of trauma and other social detriments of health, such as poverty, racism, and gender inequality. It calls on us to address not just the immediate needs of survivors, but also the underlying factors that make them vulnerable to exploitation in the first place. It challenges us to advocate for systemic change, policy reform, and community engagement to prevent human trafficking and support survivors on their path to both recovery and empowerment. Trauma-informed care is an approach to providing support and services that recognizes and responds to the impact of trauma on an individual's life. It's based on the understanding that many people have experienced trauma at some point in their lives, and that this trauma can have lasting effects on their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Trauma-informed care involves creating an environment that is safe in all ways, not just physically, supportive, and empowering for individuals who have experienced trauma. It emphasizes the importance of building trust, fostering collaboration, and promoting a sense of agency and choice for those receiving care. This approach also involves recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, understanding how trauma can affect behavior and relationships, and responding to individuals with empathy, compassion, and sensitivity. And I'll throw this in there as well. You're not going to do that if you don't take care of yourself. So if your struggle is your own self-care, that's your first step before anything I said today. Because none of this is possible if you're not filled up. We're talking about some hard stuff here, and you have to be filled up yourself, and you shouldn't be expected to face stuff like this if you yourself don't feel full. So I could say that after every paragraph that I speak, because it's such an integral part of what we're doing, to know that we have to ourselves be full to then bear witness and support people that have been through such horrible things. So there's some key principles of trauma-informed care. One is safety, ensuring that individuals feel physically and emotionally safe in their environment, but not only in the environment, also in their interactions with you. And don't underestimate how easy it can be for a trauma survivor to feel unsafe with you in those interactions where you have power. And you might be like, I don't have power. Yes, you do if you're helping them. If they're coming to you for help, you have power. And if you don't recognize that, that's a problem. And that don't mean I'm criticizing you. It means that you possibly are feeling disempowered in your role. And it's not fair for you to feel disempowered, but then be expected to empower others. How ridiculous is that? You know what I mean? So I want you to take care of yourself. I want you to feel empowered, because from that place you're then able to give that to other people. We should never be asked to give what we don't have ourselves. Trustworthiness and transparency. Building trust through clear communication, honesty, and consistency. Don't keep stuff from people about their own lives. That's disgusting to me. It's their life, not yours. Transparency, even when they're not going to like what you say. That's bravery. Brene Brown, braving the wilderness. Having conversations where you cannot control the outcome, but you walk into them because you know it's the right thing to do. So trustworthiness is really important, and there's a form of communication that there's trauma-informed communication. I don't have time to go into everything with you, but there's more to say about that. Peer support, recognizing the value of peer support and shared experiences in promoting healing and recovery. As much as other survivors can get on my nerves because I'm around them a lot in the work that I do, I realized that we did this, we were doing some exercise, we had a lot of workshops and trainings and stuff, and the question was where do you feel the most comfortable with? Out of everywhere in the world, where do you feel the most comfortable with? And obviously outside of your family, outside of your, and I was like, wow, it's with survivors of trauma. And especially for me, specifically survivors of sexual trauma, right? Because we just have so much of a shared experience in many of our struggles and triumphs and all of that. So don't underestimate the beauty of that peer support. Maybe peers can't always provide all the services you need, but they gotta have the skills to provide all that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But just having a peer to talk to know I've been through something similar, to say I'm not a clinician, but I can share with you some of the ways I got through this from just, a personal lived experience perspective. That stuff is invaluable, you guys. It really is invaluable for trauma survivors. Collaboration and mutuality. Involving individuals in decisions about their care and treatment, and really involving them. And fostering a sense of partnership and empowerment. You do not know what's best for anybody but yourself. And sometimes we don't even know that. You don't know what's best for somebody else.
trying to figure it out. Okay? It's their life. They get to choose. There is no great black hope. There is no great white hope. There is no great brown hope. There is no great yellow hope. You know what I mean? People get to choose. They get to choose their healing, and they get to choose their leaving. Because you might be thinking someone needs to leave and trying to pressure them in that direction, and you don't have all the information about what will happen when they leave to someone you may not even know about, but that they love. You know, so we just don't want to pressure people because we don't know everything. Like I said, assume you don't know it all. Empowerment, voice and choice. Respecting individuals' autonomy and agency and supporting them in making informed decisions about their own well-being, right? So while we're not making decisions for folks, we are supporting them in making those decisions because an area impacted by trauma is critical thinking. So folks who've experienced trauma definitely can appreciate the support of thinking through things and figuring out what is ultimately best for them. And cultural, historical, and gender issues, acknowledging and addressing the impact of cultural, historical, and gender-related factors on trauma and recovery. I could say a lot more about that, but I've learned, especially in a place like this, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean that in a positive way. If we had more time, I can teach you a lot about how to be a white person working with a lot of marginalized people in some cases, right? That are suffering the victimizations, and how to do it in a way where you're embraced, right? So the short version of that I'll give you, because I'm not just gonna give you a teaser like that, is by acknowledging who you are. By acknowledging a lot of people that look like you may have been harmed by people that look like me. It wasn't me personally, but I want to acknowledge that you might have some hesitations in working with me because of what I may symbolize in terms of your history in this country, but I want you to get to know me as an individual and see that who I am and how I truly want to support you. Just that alone can create a huge opening for your work with people where there may be those differences, right? And so I just wanted to share that with you, but I can. That's just a very short version. So if you mess it up, it's not my fault. That was a short version. Okay. Overall, trauma-informed care seeks to create a compassionate and understanding environment that promotes healing, resilience, and empowerment for individuals who have experienced trauma. It is a holistic approach that recognizes the complexity of trauma and the unique needs of each individual with the goal of supporting their journey towards healing and recovery. In closing, I urge each and every one of you to embrace trauma-informed practices in your work with human trafficking victims and survivors. Let us commit to creating spaces of safety, trust, and respect, where survivors can find healing, hope, and justice. Let us stand together in solidarity, compassion, and resilience, knowing that our collective efforts can make a difference in the lives of those who have endured unspeakable trauma. I leave you with this. Let us be the voice for the voiceless, the strength for the weary, and the hope for the broken. Together, we can create a world where exploitation and abuse have no place, where survivors are empowered to reclaim their lives, and where love and compassion prevail over darkness. And guess what? If you can't create that in this entire world, how about starting right here in Napa County? May my story serve as a reminder that within each of us lies the power to overcome adversity, to inspire change, and to build a future where every individual is valued, respected, and protected. Thank you for listening, for standing with me in solidarity, and for being part of this journey towards healing and justice.